Okay, I hope you could all see. And today we are going to proceed in our discussion. Well, a very warm welcome to all the new people in the audience. And for all those who are watching online, I want to see everyone. There you are. Everybody wave your hands and say hi. Atazai. So you can see that we actually have a live audience here as well. Let's get the sound back in. Okay. My dear friends, it's good to have you with us here in person. Thank you, Cynthia, for this morning's memory session. I probably should have been there too, but I forgot to come. So the reason we're doing this is because there was a time in history, actually, that the parts of Torah that were supposed to be only transmitted orally, which we're going to get into the discussion about today, were forgotten. And as you can see on this map, although this map is not very visible to see in, probably not for people on the computer and certainly not for those who are in person. But the map, what it gives you is the timeline of Jewish teachings. And as you can tell, if you're reading this part here at the bottom, which gives you the eras, it goes for 3,500 years. Because while the written part of the Torah is canonized and written down, the oral part of the Torah is still, in a sense, being developed to this very day, because, you know, all of, yes, there's the written Torah, that cannot be changed, right? That's immutable, that is non-changeable, it's inviolable. But the oral tradition, which initially was meant to remain oral, that part of Torah is something that continues to be developed and learned and understood. So when I asked you last week this question, Harold, you're here because you answered the first part. What is Torah, right? What is Torah, my friends? Well, we got a variety of answers here. Some people, starting with Harold, said, well, Torah is the scroll that is in the ark in the shul, right over there. That's true. And then I asked, and I don't remember everyone else who answered. Rochelle said something else. What did you say? You said learning and instruction. And we got all types of wonderful answers, which are all absolutely true. But there's another element and aspect to Torah, and that is, in fact, I have another video for that, but I forgot to present it today. So I'll try to bring you that one tomorrow. But a video that tells you, it shows you the two aspects and angles of Torah, but you don't need me to do that. Look right here at this library. This is a library filled with Torah literature and teachings, and the Torah is vast. And we're going to get into the texts in a moment of how vast Torah is. So here we have two dimensions, two aspects of Torah. One is the written Torah, which is what you have in your scroll, right? And the other is the oral Torah, which we will get to in a moment, maybe only tomorrow. And the truth is, delving into oral Torah we'll only do in the coming weeks. Today, I want to focus this week on the written Torah, because the written Torah you have right here. Now, how many words, just testing who remembers, how many words in the written Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, in the Pentateuch, the Chumash? Just under 80,000. To be precise, it is 79,976 words. How many, very good, very good. Now, how many words in Harry Potter Volume 1? Just to compare, lahavdil, 77,000. So basically, in a Torah scroll, you're getting, it's the size of an average novel. Yeah? I'm just comparing it for comparison's sake. So you get what I'm talking about when you look at a book of Torah versus a secular book, nothing to do with Torah. All right? Both might have the same amount. Now that's just the written, that's just the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses. What about Tanakh, which is a total of 24 books, 19 more books than the Torah? Right here, I'm holding a book of Tanakh, an old one that I found here on the bookshelf in Chabad House. It's about 1,000 pages here, okay? About 1,000 pages, obviously depending on what, version you're using. 1,000 pages, that's it, of the written Torah. Not so enormous. But when it comes to the oral Torah, which I'm showing you a library here, and I mentioned there is a computer program called Otzer HaChachma, the treasure of wisdom. In Otzer HaChachma, They've already digitalized more than 120,000 volumes, books of Torah teachings, and there's probably hundreds of thousands more, because as we delve into Torah, and over the coming weeks, we'll look at the different aspects of Torah to analyze, to look at, to understand, it continues to expand and expand and expand. So I want just, looking at this, the Torah, in the narrow sense of the term, is just including, the 5 books of the Chumash, right? That's it. In the 5, that we're just going in the literal sense, right? So both the Torah scroll and the general Torah called the same name. And when we say the teachings of the Torah, the vast body of Jewish literature, of religious Jewish literature, is referring to Torah. But they are 2 articulations of the same body of wisdom and knowledge. So when we say Torah, your answers were all correct, because Torah is teaching, Torah is instruction, and Torah is the scroll that we have in Shul, but there's a lot more to it, which we want to understand and get a deeper understanding of, which is why we're here, right? But when we say written Torah, specifically written Torah, that is either referring to the 5 books of Moses or this book of Tanakh, all 24 books of Torah, Nevi'im, Kesuvim. Loosely translated in English, what Gentiles might call the Old Testament, or we Jews would call Torah or Tanakh. Torah, Nevi'im, Kesuvim. Torah is the 5 books of Moses. Nevi'im is the prophets, and Kesuvim are the scriptures. We will spend some time in the coming days analyzing each of those areas so we can get a better understanding of each of them, okay? But in total, that is 24 books. And we'll try, whether this week or next week, to get to review just a bird's eye view of each of them. Yes, Paul. Good question. We're going to get to that in a couple of weeks. The question that Sapar is asking is, there's a Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian or Iraqi Talmud, and Talmud Yerushalmi, there's Jerusalem Talmud. They are 2 different works, completely 2 different works. The Iraqi Talmud is a lot more popular and studied in yeshivas. That's what I study every morning at Torah Academy with a group of young men. And that is known as the Talmud Bavli, the Iraqi Talmud. That was composed in exile. The one in Israel is lesser known, and we'll talk more about that, but you can imagine there's more Jews in the diaspora throughout our history than there were in Israel, and that's perhaps more related or relevant to what they knew and understood. But even still, with all 24 books, like you see, it all fits right into this. This is not a computer. This is a book, 1,000 pages. That's it. 1,000 pages in here, and you got the entirety of Tanakh. So all I'm demonstrating to you is that it's not as overwhelming as we sometimes think. How long, if you read a page a day, it'll take you 3 years, you'll be done, right? You know what I'm saying? And I'm sure you're all capable of reading a lot more than 1 page a day. We sometimes underestimate ourselves, or we just don't give ourselves enough time to actually study and apply ourselves and understand the teachings of our religion. Because if you were reading a novel, chances are you could go through chapters a day. And that's what we should really be doing with our Torah teachings, is going through a few chapters a day. But unfortunately, I'm not going to do that here with you. I will give you tastes here and there of some verses, some passages, but we're not going to be studying in text each of these, because what we really want to achieve in this new series that we're doing for the next few months will be is just a bird's eye view, a taste of, or a summary, an overview, thank you, of each of these areas. So now we talk about written Torah. This is the whole of the written Torah. That's it, this book, that's it. When we talk about the oral Torah, that's everything else. Like you can see this whole library here, hundreds and thousands of books. What you mentioned, the Talmud, the Midrashim, the halachic codes, the laws, the responsa, shilas, atribus, which means questions and answers throughout our history, Kabbalah, the mystical texts, the biblical commentaries, the works of Torah, philosophy, and ethics, known as Hakira is philosophy, Musar is ethics. If you don't know them, don't worry. That's what you're here for. We'll go through an overview, each of them, as we get a chance. That's lots of interpretation of this, the written Torah, and its exposition and commentary on all of the written Torah that we're going to look at. So when we go back to that timeline map, let me go back to the timeline right here. You can see this timeline. It actually shows you the relationship in historical time, as you can see at the bottom here, between the 5 books of the Torah, the rest of Tanakh, and the transcribed works of the oral Torah. Now, since Cynthia is here today, I will ask you, why is it that the oral Torah became written? Why is it today in the Mishnah and in the Talmud if it was meant to be oral? Why? That's Clive's question. Yeah, so do you want to give the answer or do you want me to give the answer? Yeah. No, I'm asking for a summary. I just want summary points, not alternative lectures. But yes, one at a time. Pardon? So it wouldn't be forgotten. Very good. Absolutely. Yes. So it was okay. With Jews being dispersed all over the world, and you wanted to make sure. And just by the way, if you look at a Mishnah, I was studying this morning some Talmud, and a simple question was that we're studying Tractate Kesubos, which deals with marriages, and there's different opinions. Now, hold on a second. Which is the law that Moses gave us from Sinai? Is it this one or that one or the other one? Okay, so it's based on that. And as we'll get through it, we'll understand that there are laws that are derived and there are laws that are legislated. And we'll get to that when we study Talmud a little bit. You'll see how laws are determined. But if laws are getting forgotten already, that we have different opinions by the time the temple is being destroyed, we have some trouble here because they were already forgetting it. And this one's saying this is what it is, this one's saying that's what it is. And Moses is no longer around to ask him, hey, Mo, what do you say? You know? So they realized, okay, it's time to transcribe it. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to put up a text here that will tell us why. But first, just one more differentiation between written and oral, okay? As the name written implies, what does written tell you? That it was put into writing. It's, so to say, the textbook of the Jewish religion. And then you had the professor. So here you have the textbook of Jewish religion, but then the professor gives you his lecture. And this is more like the lecture from the professor. That's the way I see it. Yes, Cynthia. Yeah. So when it's written, it's inviolable. It's not changeable. And therefore it was meant to be written because that's the Holy Scripture. There's nothing to change about it. Absolutely. And that's where the oral law comes in. When it comes to oral law, maybe that's part of why it wasn't written down. It's because it was understood there would be different circumstances. And maybe that's why there are different opinions when it comes to the oral law. And that's why you have diversion. And that's why you have Sephardic custom and Ashkenaz custom. And there were 12 tribes of Israel because we're not all the same. So what was meant to be all the same is in the Torah. Where there could be differences is in the oral law. Okay. And there you can see there are differences and different customs and ideas. So when it came to the written Torah, I'm talking specifically about those 24 books of Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim. Torah, the scriptures, and the prophets. But change that order. Torah, prophet, scriptures. Okay, even those words don't seem so. What does it mean, scriptures? Don't worry, we'll get to it. Don't make sure to come back tomorrow so we can understand what prophets, a little bit about the prophets, a little bit about the scriptures. But that was all taught, that was all received by prophecy. What we call Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration. That's how that came. But when it comes to the oral Torah, which on this screen, I'm just showing you a lot of books. but we're talking about many generations of teachings, from rabbi to student, from teacher to disciple. That was never officially written down. And it's debated. In fact, the Talmud tells us that it was originally forbidden to be written, as I will put here in our text, in the actual text that you'll see on the screen in a second. So let's read it from the Gemara itself. Says the Gemara right here. Sorry, I have one more slide for you that could depict it, or maybe a few more slides. No, we'll start with this one. Okay, so Torah scroll versus general Torah. Torah scroll, Chumash, right? 5 books of Moses. Chumash means 5, Chamesh, Pentateuch. It was written over 40 years by Moses in the Sinai desert. What's not included here, as I said a moment ago, don't worry, I have a slide for that in a few minutes, I'll put it up, is the teachings of the Tanakh, which is included. General Torah, we say hundreds of thousands of writings written over the last 3,300 years in all corners of the world. So here, let's look at what the Gemara tells us in Tractate Gittin. Just by the way, when it comes to a short text, I'll give you the Hebrew. When the longer text, I will only give you the English. Okay, that's why I'm doing it for now. Or what I could do, something that's a little bit more familiar, I will put in Hebrew, but anything that's long, we'll just stick to in English. Since it's short, I will give you the Hebrew as well. Since this is from the Gemara, let's read it together. The Gemara says, Devarim shebichsav, the words that were given in writing, you're not allowed to communicate them orally. Now just think about that. If it was given in written format, I tell my kids, it's something my father used to tell me. There's an expression from the Talmud that says, I forgot it. Cynthia, you really need to work on me. The Talmud says, you've ever heard that expression? Actually, I don't know if it's from the Talmud or where it's from. I know it from my father. Seeing the letters makes you wise. Now I could tell you myself that over my years, particularly when I knew it all as a teenager, I would say certain prayers or passages by heart. And sometimes I tended to make up words. To the extent that it was so embedded in me, the made up words, that I said it wrong for many, many years. And I don't know, one day I'm reading it inside the siddur and I go, oh my goodness, why didn't I realize that I'm pronouncing it wrong all the way till now? I'm telling you. So it happened. What happened was actually 3 years ago, my father passed away. My father was very committed to always using a siddur, and at least he would tell us to do that, right? To look in the siddur. And he would give us an example. The Rebbe you could watch so many videos of the Rebbe. I have no doubt the Rebbe knew not only the siddur, but much of Torah and Talmud by heart. Yet the Rebbe would never pray by heart. He would always pray looking inside a siddur. So my father would say to us, look at the Rebbe looking in a siddur, you do the same. And I would say, I know it by heart. But then I, got a little older, and my father passed away 3.5 years ago. And I decided to do something in his honor and his memory. That when I'm praying for him every day, meaning in the year of mourning, there's a custom that one who is a mourner should try to lead the prayer services. So whereas in my own shul, I do it out of necessity because no one else volunteers to do it. But when I'm in another shul, I can let someone else be the chazan. But the custom is still that since I was in mourning, I should be the one to lead the service. And I decided a good resolution to honor my father. He was very meticulous about us reading inside the siddur. I would do that in his honor. Even though before, even when I was chazan in my own shul, I oftentimes would try to just do things by heart because it was just a habit of nature. Let me tell you, I discovered some gross mistakes that I've been making for decades. I was just saying the words wrong. How did I pick up on it? Because I started reading it meticulously in the siddur, not just looking in the siddur, glancing here and there. And I mean, just a word that came up before Ashrei in Tachanon, we say Azreinu Elokei Yishenu. I don't know why I was saying Ezreinu for many, many years. Maybe I heard it from somebody else. I was repeating someone else's mistake. But the word is Azreinu, just giving you a personal example. So when you look inside, what's the Gemara saying here? The Talmud is saying that the words that were given in writing, you cannot just give them or say them orally by heart. They have to be, they were communicated in writing. We should know them in writing. Now, that being said, we had a visitor from Yemen, Yemen, a few weeks ago to our shul during the summer holidays. And I found something very interesting. Yemenite Jews tend to know lots of Tanakh by heart. Why? Even today, even though they're no longer living in Yemen, most of them living in Israel. Because in Yemen, they didn't have very many books. So what would the teacher do? Would teach different groups. And those who, like this side, would read the book. And they would learn to read the books like this guy was telling us in shul. Sometimes they learn to read it backwards. Because depending which side of the class you were on. So if you were this side of the class, you got to read the text this way. If you were that side of the class, you got to read it that way. Fascinating stuff this young man said to us. But even today in Israel, Yemenite Jews tend to know a lot of Torah by heart because that was the way they studied in Yemen. And they wound up learning a lot of these things by heart. So I don't think it means that you can't know it by heart. But the point is, the written Torah, the Gemara is saying, was meant to remain written. On the other hand, Dvarim Sheba'al Peh, these words that were taught orally, meaning the rabbinic traditions. The Gemara is saying, you cannot communicate them in writing. Now, it's true, you could take notes. It doesn't mean that you weren't allowed to take notes. Your teacher taught you something, you could take notes. But it wasn't formally published as a book. Not just because there was no printing press yet there were many scrolls. People had scrolls of the Torah. But they didn't have scrolls of the oral law. Everyone understand what I'm saying? Came along one day a great occupational therapist, predating Cynthia a couple of years. His name was Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. And this man thought to himself, oh, we got a little crisis. The temple was destroyed. Jews are now dispersed all over the world. We have a problem. With Jews moving all over the world, the Romans took a lot to Rome. Many Jews wound up moving out of Israel because Israel was under Roman occupation. And the Romans were persecuting the Jews in Israel. So many Jews went to other surrounding countries. And you can imagine, from Lebanon and Syria, they made it to Egypt and to Iraq and to Iran and to Spain and to India. And Jews were going all over the four corners of the globe. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi said there's a problem. The written Torah, they all have scrolls of. And you'll notice, you look at a Torah that comes from any part of the world, and it's the same Torah. There are minor differences in spelling, not in the words. You will not find a difference in the word between a Torah from the Middle East and Europe or anywhere else. They're all the same Torah, thousands of years, and yet we have the same Torah. There are a few words that might be spelled differently, and you'll find that in the differences that, like the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found. Anyone ever been to Qumran? It's a place in Israel where they found these ancient scrolls. Again, all the same exact script. Again, that's the Torah. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi lived about 1,800 years ago. Which is, by the way, about 1,500 years after the Torah was given. Let's do the simple math. This coming Shavuos, in about 3-4 months, will be 3,335 years since the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Right? 1,800 years ago? What is that? 1,500 years or so from the giving of the Torah. He started to put it into writing. Now, I imagine he had a big team. You think about some of the publications today. Anyone here use Art Scroll? Here's an Art Scroll book. The Art Scroll has a team of editors and writers, and what they're doing is writing commentaries, putting it into very easy format for today's day and age to make it easier for each of us to be able to study it. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, he had a whole team of scribes who were able to take these writings and put them into the text that we have. So we're going to talk about the circumstances that led to this in a couple of weeks' time. We're not there yet. I'm just giving you an overview for now. But even today, after the publication of so many thousands of books of the oral Torah, what do we call it? It's all written, right? Look at all these books we have in our library. Yet, what do we still call it? We still call it the oral Torah. So again, written Torah is an unalterable text. You cannot change it. This was the word from God to Moses at Sinai and to all the other prophets that were canonized in those 24 books. not changeable. Every individual letter is significant. Not only are the letters significant, we'll get to this maybe tomorrow or the next day, one of the texts I'm going to present. Not only the letters, but even those little crowns on top of the letters, even the trop, the musical cantillation. Think about the example I gave you a couple of weeks ago, the word vayima'en. Remember when Joseph resisted the temptation of Potiphar's wife when she tried to seduce him? The musical cantillation is a very rare one. It's called the shalshelet. It goes like this. Which means he resisted. But if I were to sing song it to you, and he resisted, why is his resistance so all over? It is so windy. And the answer very simply is because it wasn't easy to resist the temptation. You think about Joseph, Nebuch, this poor kid abandoned by his family. His brothers tried to kill him. All this rivalry, he's an orphan, all these struggles and challenges. And he thinks to himself, why not enjoy a little bit of pleasure in life? This woman's trying to seduce him, so I'll have some instant gratification. Why not? It was difficult to resist. Then he saw the image of his father. And then he thought to himself, what about my future? And Joseph decided, I'm not going to do it, right? But that resistance wasn't easy. And the point I'm making to you is, when you look at this trop, the musical cantillation, that very word, it's showing you his vacillation in that. So giving you examples that every single letter, nuance, word is all precise and exact. And you might not realize it, but in my shul, I have two guys standing on top at the bima to correct me if I make a mistake, because I'm not an expert Balkara. There are certain people, they are expert, and they even get paid to read from the Torah in this proficient, skilled, adept way. Unfortunately, I'm not trained that way, but my father did teach us as kids to learn and to study the Torah in that way. So I try my best. I have two people standing there. In case I make a mistake, correct me. Because every single word, letter, sound is exact and is significant. And we have to make sure to do our best to do it, to read it in the proper way. Yes, Bar. No, I think it's the same trop. It's the same musical cantillation of Ashkenazim and Sephardim, but the pronunciation is different. I love in some of the Sephardic shuls, it sounds like a story the way they tell it. The truth is, the way we say it is also story-like, but most of us don't know how to read it correctly. But if you pay attention to that reading, there is music to it. And music is supposed to articulate and express and give you that meaning. Now, if the Balkara is like, you know, like your son, Roslyn, that's a Balkara, right? Rabbi Finkelstein, Rav Ruvain, when he reads from the Torah, I'd never heard of Chaim, although I learned of him too. But you hear the music in it. Some Balkaras, you know, the same thing. Sometimes a guy goes up to the Amud, a guy goes to be the Chazan, and it's dead. Here. I want to, by the way, tell you a story about that. I told my shul on Shabbos a thing not to be judging people as we see it in the Torah portion itself, where it, just to repeat a vart that I gave there. Last week's portion starts to list the genealogy, the lineage, and really it's supposed to get to the tribe of Levi, but it starts off Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and it doesn't go further. So Rashi, who's the foremost commentator of Torah, gives us two answers, two explanations for this. Explanation number one, he says, is because it needed to tell us about Levi. It didn't want to skip Reuven and Shimon. But that doesn't seem sufficient, because you want to tell us about Levi, that Moses came from Levi, that Aaron came from Levi, Yocheved, Amram, Miriam. They all came from the tribe of Levi. They were the ones who rescued the Jewish people. You know, maybe if Moses was a slave like the rest of them, he too could have been living the life of slavery and not knowing better. But because Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace, Moses appreciated and understood that there's a better life than this. And he tried to tell the people, don't be stuck there. You know, there's a famous story about once upon a time when there would be a poritz. Poritz were these landlords, and they were very cruel and rude and mean to their tenants. And they had a Jewish tenant. And so the Jewish tenant couldn't pay. They threw this tenant into a pit. One day, this guy gets joined by another one, and now there's a whole family growing in there. And now there's children and grandchildren. They don't know better. To them, they think life is in a pit. And one day they're joined by another inmate, and he says, you know, there's a whole life out there. How could they believe that there's a life out there? They never experienced it. So Moses, growing up in the palace, to him, Indeed, there's life outside of slavery. And in fact, how could he tolerate that his people, his own people, are suffering as slaves? So there's something to this, that Moshe didn't grow up in slavery outside. But on the other hand, the other, just a second, I'm just going to hide this because it's high flooding. Men. But on the other hand, what was I getting at here with this? Moses, okay, so that's the tribe of Levi. They were the leaders. So the word was, Rashi says that the second reason why it's being mentioned is because previously we see that Yaakov reprimands Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. He says to them that they are volatile and their behaviors. Before he passed away, he gave them a little bit of amapala, But it doesn't mean he doesn't love them. Rashi says, Lefishem chashuvim. They were still significant and important to him. Never to underestimate people's importance. As a parent, we love our children, but sometimes we have to discipline them, correct? True or true? Good. But it doesn't mean we don't have to love them. So now, why was I telling you this? Oh, about judging others. The great famous singer, Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, uncle of Rabbi Carlebach here, he relates a story that he once came to Poland. Now, he was a survivor himself. He came back sometime after the war. I don't know what year it was. And he was in Krakow. And he walks into the main shul, one of the surviving shuls of the Holocaust. And in the shul, there's a chazan. Oy, this chazan was terrible. This guy is messing up the words. You remember what I was telling you before? Now, I would mess up the words out of my own negligence because I wasn't reading them properly inside. I was saying it by heart. I could only imagine if somebody walked into my shul or anywhere else and heard me mispronouncing their words, I go, oh my goodness. You ever been under a chuppah and the rabbi doesn't know how to read those words of the ketubah properly? I've been there a few times. Okay, if you don't know better, it's okay. But if you do know better, you go, what's... So I'm just imagining someone who heard me as a rabbi davening and mispronouncing those words. I'm thinking, wow, what an embarrassment. Rabbi Carlebach described that he was in that shul and he thinks to himself, what a schwanz, they put the shmo as a chazan. He can't even pronounce the words properly. And he's so embarrassed, he decided it's better for me to go outside the shul. I can't tolerate, and he was a very famous chazan, a cantor and a singer. I can't tolerate listening to this chazan butchering the words. And he walked out of the shul. But it came time for Torah reading. He's not going to skip the Torah reading. He doesn't have a Torah outside. So he went back into the shul for the Torah reading, and he noticed something very interesting. When the chazan was carrying the Torah, all the congregants take their hands out to kiss the Torah, the chazan couldn't hold the Torah by himself. He was being supported by two people. And it also looked like the chazan couldn't see because his eyes, so he was wondering now, what's this about? So he asked somebody, who's this chazan? Who's this guy? Why is he up there? Did he pay some money to stand up there? Is he some guy that, thinks he's a big shot and they put him up there because he paid a couple of bucks? Somebody said, "Somebody crazy? You don't know who he is? He's the famous world-renowned cantor of Krakow. Before the war, this chazan, people would flock from all over to hear this world-renowned cantor. And he would sing in the big shuls and he would give concerts all over the world. Sadly, in the concentration camps, he was one of the guinea pigs, the experiment of the Nazis. And they did some experimentation with his eyes and he was blinded. And because he couldn't see anymore, he also lost a lot of his voice, all as a result of the Holocaust. He always refused to be chazan. He had yahrzeit this week, and he didn't want to be the chazan. We begged, we pleaded, we beseeched him, please go up to the Amud. We need you, we want you to be the chazan. And after much conniving and convincing, we got him to go up to the Amud. Whoa. After hearing that, imagine how Rabbi Carlebach felt himself. Just imagine. Here he's judging this guy, this Meshuggah thinks he could go up to the Amud and daven. Yet now he discovers the other side of the story. The man used to be a renowned cantor. People would come all over to hear his beautiful melodious voice. So don't judge people, right? I wanted to judge. Why did I mention judgment here? You got to remind me, we had a flow going on. Yeah, I brought that in as well. Anyways, gedenklich nicht, but the point, I'm already forgetting. So Cynthia's going to have to incorporate me in our classes. But the point is, the oral Torah, we still call it oral, right? It's still oral. It still remains an ongoing conversation rather than a static text. It is still an ongoing conversation. It is still something we're it's still happening. And so, ladies and gents, the oral Torah, unlike the written Torah, is not a prescribed text. It is handed from teacher to disciple. It originally was not to be written. It was prohibited from being transcribed. And it includes teachings from all throughout the original books of the Tanakh, the 24 books of the Torah. But it was expounded upon and explained, and laws derived and legislated and learned from them. So, in other words, the Torah is designed to exist in these two distinct formats. You have Torah A, which is the written books, and Torah B, so to say, this is the conversation, right? The first part is the books of the Torah that were written, that were transcribed. And the second is comprised of the people, the teachers, the students who are continuing this dialogue, this conversation, this deliberation throughout the generations, a discussion, a dynamic discussion. Think about how many questions arise even today. This morning, I was on the phone with the Beis Din, discussing different aspects of, we have our upcoming Pesach retreat, how to deal with certain aspects of, from a halachic perspective. So the point is, it's an ongoing conversation. And like we read before, that we're not allowed to teach the written Torah orally. It always has to be studied from the actual text. Well, likewise, it was originally forbidden to write down, to transcribe the oral law, okay? Now, even though this policy was changed because Rabbi Yehuda Anasi felt it would be forgotten, but still, it was, the original purpose was that it remained in the written format. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, now we're only talking about the written, that it was to remain in a written format, that it was specifically to be written as a Torah, that you always have the reference, the source. That doesn't mean that you can't actually teach it or discuss it or quote it aloud by heart. So, ladies and gents, here are some questions for discussion before it's supposed to be questions for discussion. All right. So let's just analyze this as our questions for discussion. I don't know if we'll get to our video today, before we touch on a few more points. Why is the Torah formulated as both written and an oral dialogue? And what would be lacking if there was only a written? Why did there have to be also the oral tradition? Can you think of any benefits of having oral versus just written?
Today, which are not specifically linked to the Torah, and we need to know how to interpret those things in accordance with Allah.
Absolutely. Pardon? Well, the tefillin is a good example. The Torah tells us about tefillin, but how do they look and what is the? Yeah. So obviously, we've all heard some interesting ideas. And think about if it's a conversation, it's not just a written book. I could always say, I'll get to the book when I need it. I'll open the book up when I come to it. Let me tell you, when I was studying for smicha to become a rabbi, and throughout the year, Rabbi Weinberg tested us, and it was very grueling tests. Then at the end of the year, rabbis came from Israel, from the chief rabbinate of Israel, to test us. And we sat there with our books, and I remember the rabbi asking me a question. And right away, we had like 6 books. I take out the one book and I start opening it, and he moves on to the next question. I said, but I didn't answer the question yet. He says, I don't need you to answer the question. I want to know that you know where to look to answer the question. So let's go on to the next one. And I got a great idea out of that, right? So the idea was that there should be a conversation. We should know where to look. We should have this dynamic aspect of our Judaism. So we'll come back to these questions in the coming days. I just want you to understand this idea that there's the written and there's the oral. And before we can understand the relationship between the written and the oral, which we're going to spend time on, we need to know what the written Torah contains. So that's what we're, please God, going to do this week. We're going to take a overview, a guided tour of the 24 books of the Torah. I hope it won't go longer than this week and maybe next. I'm not going to go in detail of each one of them, but we'll look at, because the Torah itself, those 24 books, they constitute the foundations. They are the fundamental groundwork upon which the entire edifice of Jewish learning is built upon. And therefore, we need to start with that. So to just summarize what we discussed so far, we said that the two forms of Torah, the written and the oral. And we said that Jewish tradition, and we say the written is that inviolable text as we wrote over here, sorry. And we said that the oral is the ongoing dialogue, communication, discussion, the people, each of us putting our mind and applying the Torah to our lives as well. Now, let us try to analyze, to look a little bit at the rest of the Torah, at the 24 books of Tanakh. That's what I want to do this week, because we know they're divided into 3 sections, right? Let's put that up here. What are the 3 sections of the 24 books of Tanakh? Well, we talked about the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the Kesuvim, the prophets. I'm going to put each of them up in a moment, how they're divided, so you could see exactly what it is. So if you look here we have 5 books, Pentateuch, 5 books of Moses, why we have long noses. Okay, what are these? Bereshis, Genesis, Shemais, Exodus, Vayikra, Leviticus, Bamidbar, Numbers, and Devarim, Deuteronomy, which means the repetition, the review. Now, just imagine that you are a librarian for a moment, right? You're the manager of a bookstore. And here you get this book here, 1,000-page volume arrives at your desk, and you're seeing it for the very first time. You don't know which section. You have to look through the book first. Aviva's the librarian here. So Aviva, what would you do? Where would you put this book? In which section of the library? You need to put it on the shelf. Well, our library here, thank God, is very nicely cataloged, thanks to Aviva. And it's very well organized. So which section should you put it in? That's my question. You know the story about a man walks into the bookstore and he asks the woman behind the counter, he says, where's the self-help section? She says, I can't tell you, that would defeat the purpose. So which section do you put all these books in? Look at it, right? Oh, you say it's easy, put it in the religion section. Well, let me ask you something. Religion sounds very straightforward and obvious, okay? But let's say there's no religion section, because back then religion wasn't invented yet, my friends. So where does it go now? History. It's true. Torah has history, but if you've been coming here long enough, you know that it's not just his story, it's also her story. And it's not just her story, it's also our story. So what else do you say? Law, that's true. There's plenty of law, and there's history, and there's literature, and there's poetry, and there's ethics, and there's sociology, right? So keep going, pardon? Well, the point is that all of this fits there, right? Because you could place the Tanakh in any of these sections and it would fit right in. It's right there. Because all in Tanakh, you have all of these genres, all these themes. The Tanakh is a law book. How many laws are in the Tanakh? Let's just see if you could jog your memory. 613, very good. Right? Divine commandments. What else? So we have the commandments that God gave Moshe at Mount Sinai in the desert. We also have many ethical and moral instructions by the later prophets, as you can see. Let's quickly familiarize ourselves with the prophets, as you can see on the screen. We have the first book is Joshua. Then you have Shoftim, Judges. Then you have Shmuel, the Shmuel Aleph, Shmuel Beis. There is Malachim, Kings, Aleph and Beis, 2 volumes. You have Yeshayahu, Isaiah, the prophet. You have the prophets of Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, that's more morbid. You have the prophets of Ezekiel, Yecheskel. Then there's one set called Treyas, or 12. Here you have the prophets of Hosea and Yoel and Amos and Obadiah and Yonah and Micha and Nachum and Habakkuk and Savanya and Haggai and Zephaniah, Zechariah and Malachi. And then we could go into the book, into the writings, the scriptures, right? Here you have the most famous book of Tehillim, Psalms. Then you have Mishlei, known as Proverbs. Iyov, the book of Job. Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, very, very romantic. Maybe Torah should go in the romance section. Yeah? Then you have the book of Ruth. And you have Eicha, Lamentations. And Kohelet is Ecclesiastes. And the book of Esther, Purim's around the corner, 6 weeks to Purim. You have the book of Daniel. You have Ezra and Nehemiah and Divrei Hayamim, the Chronicles. So there's lots of sections. And the point is that, yes, you have history. It starts from the very beginning of time, from Genesis. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. And then it describes God's creation of the world. And it goes on to describe the formative events of the human race. So you have lots in here. And then it chronicles the history of our people, the patriarchs and matriarchs of the Jewish nation, up until the Second Temple era, where you have the end of the prophets and scriptures. And of course, the Torah is unparalleled as a work of literature, right? It contains the most exquisite poetry ever written. Look at all these works here. It is a profound work of philosophy. And for the person seeking insight into the nature of human relationships and the dynamics of human society, no doubt, if you look into Torah, there's no more complete sociological manual than the Tanakh, right? In the words of the Mishnah that I want to put up here for you, let me first, okay, let's go back to that for a second. Oops, I jumped too far. So what is Tanakh? Ethics, core values, morals, history, philosophy, poetry, law, it's all there. Let's read this text from the Mishnah and Pirkei Avos that I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. In fact, there's a famous Shrekky song on these words. You know Shrekky? How does it go? Hapach ba, dechula ba, ben bag, goimer. You know that song? Uvo sechze, bo, usiv levo, uminala isazua, shein lecha mida toiva. I lost it. Hey man, what does it mean? Read the words here. Delve into it and delve into it, for everything is in it. And see with it. Grow old and worn in it. Do not budge from it. Ben Bagbag, the great sage, taught. For there's nothing better than it. Ben Bagbag told us these words. So what is the common denominator of all the written Torah's elements, my friends? The word Torah means, who said it, Rochelle? Instruction. Okay? The word Torah means instruction. And so, my friends, every word of the Torah is instructive. That's why we do our chitas every day, where we study the portion of each day's chumash to learn, to derive lessons for life. Like this week's parsha, Parshat Bo. Doesn't it seem grammatically incorrect? Bo doesn't mean go, even though it rhymes bo, go. But bo doesn't mean go. Bo means come. Doesn't seems a little funny to say, God says to Moses, come to Pharaoh. You don't say come to Pharaoh, we say go to Pharaoh. But what do we learn from this? God saying to Moshe, Bo, come, I'm coming with you. We're going together. Something we have to remember in life. You know, sometimes you're feeling all alone. You need some happiness to call your own. Nothing is going the way it should, although you're trying to do the best you could. You ever feel that way? You know what you need to do. But Hashem says to Moshe in our parsha, lift up your eyes to the sky. Your life's in his hands. Trust in him, and he will reply, guiding all your steps, always at side. You are his joy and pride. Cause don't you know, you're never alone, you're never alone. It doesn't matter where you are. There's just nothing in his eyes more special than you. Wherever you go, Hashem goes with you. Cause don't you know, you're never alone. Can I say it again? You're never alone, never alone. It doesn't matter where you are. There's nothing in his eyes more special than you. Wherever you go, Hashem is with you. That's what Hashem is saying to Moshe. Boel Paro, come, let's go together. And we have to remember that message in life. We're never alone. Pardon? It's an Avram Fried song that my kids enjoyed, and I caught on to the words. But the point, of course, is that this is the message. And the idea is every time you study the portion, every day, there's a message and lesson for life. It's not his story, it's our story. That's why Torah means instruction. It's not just the Bible, the book. It's not just bibliography and history. Our story. It has messages and lessons that are instructive for us and pragmatic and relevant to every single era, to every single day. And when we get to the oral Torah, we'll talk about that. So the point we're making here is that every word in Torah obviously is instructive. Torah means instruction. It's a guide to life. The mitzvahs detail the do's and the don'ts of our life. And just like they were instructed from God, the way God intended them, right? So God is the creator of heaven and earth, the creator and the designer, the programmer of each and every one of us. And God programmed us in this way. Just like everything comes with a instruction manual, the Torah is the instruction manual about how to live a life. Right? Every other component, every story, every historical or biographical account that's included in Torah, every moral, ethical, philosophical insight that you'll see in the Torah, every saying and aphorism, it's all Torah's Chaim. It's all an instruction of life for each one of us. And so I think that with this introduction, please God, tomorrow morning, what I will do is, instead of me taking you into the details of every single one of the 24 books of Tanakh, which I think will take up quite a bit of time, we have a great video that will give you that bird's eye view, the overview, the history, and the contents of all 24 books of the written Torah. And you will follow it. It will give you that map. So tomorrow morning, we're going to start with that video, please God, first thing. And then after the video is done, we will discuss and analyze and glean. I don't want to say lessons and ideas. This is less of an inspirational aha moment. You know, usually we try to have an aha moment every day. I will still try to give you some aha moments because every day we have to have that inspiration inside us. Because as our motto here is, we must desire to aspire, to inspire, and don't before you retire so you won't expire. Something like that. We're working on our motto here, right? Less oil, more joy. But the idea is that, please God, tomorrow, after watching the video, my hope is that we'll then dissect each of those aspects and look at different areas, different messages and lessons, and take maybe some texts from throughout Tanakh and see what the Talmud says about it. And we'll spend the next couple of days looking at the Tanakh. Maybe we'll give you samples of each book of Tanakh and some texts from each one, so that you can just get some ideas and lessons. But the video, key part will be, we'll start with that video tomorrow, because this video will take us through each of the books, and then we'll look at some ideas of each book. Questions or alternative speeches?
Can I summarize?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the oral Torah is the physical manifestation of our day.
You could certainly say so. That's already getting mystical and deep. So certainly that makes sense. And that's certainly what's taught in Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, that if it's that it is a manifestation of the tree of knowledge. The thing is, the tree of knowledge was good and evil, right? God created good and evil. If we remember last course, we talked about same God who created good is the same God who created evil. And there's lots of incomprehensible evil that exists in the world. And the idea was that if they remained in this world, that evil would have an eternal, infinite existence, which God didn't want. God wants us to refine and eliminate the evil by illuminating the world. So it's certainly accurate. Yes, absolutely. So through the Torah, we achieve that. But we have both the oral and the written, as we discussed today. And you need the two together. Like Brian said, to fill in that the Torah tells us, what is it? What does it look like? How would you ever know if you didn't have the oral tradition to explain it to you? So good example that you gave. Good point. Any other questions before we conclude? Please God, tomorrow morning, 9:30, Dr. Helen Kennedy will be here to do breathing and stretching, followed by our shir at 10:15 Jewish time. Looking forward to seeing you all. Anyone who wants to chat with me, I'm happy to talk with you in person. And we'll end today's shir right here. Like we said, every aspect of the Torah is this instruction of life, and it's important that we study it all, and we'll get a taste of all those areas, please God, in the coming days. No, when does he want to do it? He didn't call me. Zach is on to everyone. Cheers. Please come join us in